Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Leeds International Festival of Ideas. Is everyone all right? You all okay? Have we had a little drink in the bar before? Good. Yeah, that lady has, yep. That was a definite yes. We're going to be here for about an hour and a half. Yotam's going to be out in a moment. We're going to sit, have a chat, talk about our theme this evening, which is the universal language of food. Whilst you're listening to us talk, if there's any points that you think we should have delved into a bit deeper, or any questions that you think I should have asked, or just anything you want to know, then there will be time at the end. We're going to get half an hour where we'll have someone wandering around with a boom mic so you can get to ask your question. And it doesn't have to be about the theme either. It doesn't have to be anything to do with what we've been talking. Yotam just said that if you want to ask what you should have for your dinner tonight, he's happy to answer. I also just want to introduce you to Charlotte. I'm going to have a little wave to Charlotte. Hello, Charlotte. Charlotte is our BSL interpreter. She will be there for the course of the evening. So at some stages you may see me repeat a question that's been asked or slow down my questions, and that is, of course, for Charlotte's benefit and then anyone that is using the interpreter. So, should we get Yotam out? You don't want to listen to me bang on, do you? So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Yotam Ottolenghi.
Thank you. This is very nice. Thank you for coming.
I didn't even get a ripple of applause for it. Not even a ripple. So I've explained that a bit later on. We'll be taking some questions from the audience. No holds barred, you said.
Yeah, no, that's fine. You can ask me what you like.
You'll regret that. So the theme of the talk is the universal language of food. I want to begin with something that's quite personal tonight. Everybody's here more or less because of food. It's food, it's your food, and that's what's brought us together. So my first question for this evening is, what is it, do you think, about food that brings people together?
I suppose it's like sex, right? It's like a universal language. Everybody does it, and it's like we all know what it is, and I think it's a basic thing, and it's quite trivial when you spell it out like that, but it is what unites us. I mean, it's beyond it's cross-cultural, and it's the first thing we do when we arrive in the world, and I think that kind of idea that we're all experts in food because we all have taste buds and we all know what we like and what we don't like. We just discussed our kids and how fussy they are or not.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the dramas of our lives. They are like around food. So I think this is why we all feel that connection to food. It is the most universal thing, and yeah, that's.
I think that food is a massive part of culture, but culture is also a big part of food, and that's something that we're going to be talking more on a bit later on. We're going to talk about globalization and food culture across the world, not just kind of localized and within our homes. But what would you say are some of the commonalities of food culture across the world, so that we all share?
Well, I suppose it is, first of all, I think every food culture, and I've traveled and tried food in different parts of the world, not everywhere, but in quite a few places. And it's funny and it's interesting to see how every culture has its own building blocks. And they could be so similar and they can also be so different. So if you travel to Thailand, there is fish sauce, and there's chilies, and there's loads of particular herbs like coriander, kind of mint, etc. And there's nothing like it, really. That's Thai food. And if you travel to Morocco, you've got a lot of cumin, chilies again, but in a really kind of a slightly completely different context. And there is a lot of lamb and slow cooked and garlic. And so what I think there's kind of it's really like languages. They have their own logic. You know, each cuisine, each cuisine of whether it's a region or a nation. I mean, that when you start breaking it down, it becomes complicated, also politically complicated. But it's fascinating to see how specific it is. But then it's also the opposite. So I'm saying one thing, but I'm also contradicting myself. There's certain things that are really completely cross-cultural. And it's incredible to see how things are done. So for instance, I was talking about chili. So chili sauces, in so many cultures there's chili sauces, and they're done in different ways. You can dry chilies and then rehydrate them and makes sauce like harissa that you find in Tunisia and other parts of North Africa. Or you could make a fresh chili sauce which just gets pounded up, and then you can add garlic to it, or dried shrimps, or sweet spices, etc. Every culture will have its own. But the ability to kind of add heat and all the other flavors that come with it, with the chilies, to dishes, to enhance them, to make them exciting, to make a bit of drama, is something that is cross-cultural. It exists not in every culture, but in many cultures, from Mexico to India, to bits of the Middle East, to Southeast Asia. So it's really interesting to see how these languages are, how much similar they are, but also how different they are. And I just find that really inspiring.
How important do you think it is, though, that we have these commonalities?
I think that it can kind of go both ways. So it is important because one of the things that I spend quite a lot of time thinking about is how can you be playful in food without offending anyone, and without whilst doing justice to people's foods, because in some ways, foods are the most instinctive thing, and you can, if you go and learn how to make a dish, it's like a set of instructions. You could cook food from all over the world, but you're not going to be an expert. There is something about cooking something over and over and over and over again, or growing up with a particular set of dishes that does make you more of an expert on these dishes. So it's a kind of a thin line to walk, but I think. Going back to the actual question, is like how important it is that we've got these commonalities. It's really important because it is a universal language, eating, and it's something that we can talk about before we break into any other kind of more complicated subject. It's the most immediate thing that we do, and I've got a lot of examples, private examples of things that have happened to me, situation in which food really helped break the ice. So I'll give you just a couple of examples. So about 10 years ago, I traveled to the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and I did a show for Channel 4 about food in Morocco, and I was kind of dropped into a Berber village to see how couscous is being made, like rolled by hands, because they don't come in packets originally. It's actually semolina. It's a painstaking process in which semolina is steamed and then passed through a sieve to a greater degree of fineness, and there was the bunch of women who were making couscous, and I sat there, and we really didn't share a language, so there was nothing I could say to them that they would understand, and vice versa. And it was really, and I sat and I was just watching and trying to kind of copy what they were doing, etc. And then at some point they just started laughing, like really kind of hysterical, but like wholeheartedly. And
you had no idea.
And I was like, what are they laughing about? I have no clue. And then they told the translator that it was just, they've never seen a man make couscous in their lives. It was the first time that they've seen like male hands handle couscous.
Wow.
And it was, and then we all laughed, and I said like, oh, actually we're just like all sisters, it's all fine, we can have fun. And I asked him to translate, but it was such an icebreaker, the hands and the couscous, the laughter, and then they showed me how you pick it up with your hands and eat it, because you don't use utensils to eat couscous, and that was just like a moment. And I think if there wasn't food there, what would we have talked? What would we have conversed about? It was just that moment, and it was kind of like meant to be, right? Like that was the only thing that we could have chatted about.
You get to travel a lot.
Yeah.
You always seem to be here, there, and everywhere. Is that something that you actively seek out now? Will you think, right, before I go to the local museum or the local gallery, let's go and find out all the local food.
Yeah,
Let's find
I
a
do
decent...
that. I'm quite obsessive about that, and I always used to go, like, I'm not wasting my time going somewhere where I'm not going to have good food, because it's like life is too short. I need ideas for recipes, and I have to go some places where there's good food. I've become a little bit more forgiving, so I don't mind if it's a beautiful beach, I'll go even if the food isn't that great. But it is. I mean, it is a motivation, and I am always looking for ideas, because I love food where I come across it, and it's not in restaurants normally. It's in people's homes or local joints. But I also love to play with the food that I find, and I remember years ago I went again back to Thailand, and I had to try this. I read about this place that makes a particular type of oyster omelette. So it's oysters that are it's like a fried scrambled situation with the eggs, and then oysters are thrown in, and they kind of mix up, and it's a wonderful textural experience. And I wanted to, if you like those kind of things, and I really wanted to find that particular place. And in Bangkok, it's like street signs are hard to find, and then it's all jumbled up. But I had this address, and I went, like, I think I spent like an hour and a half finding this, looking for this place. It was a hot day. And then when I arrived, it was a Monday, and they were shut. And it was like the devastation, I had to try the oyster omelet. But I compensated by, I tried to, when I got back home, I didn't have my oyster omelet. I started reading about how you make this particular kind of oyster omelet that I missed out on. And you have to make a slurry, kind of a mix like flour and water to create like lumps, so in order to kind of create a bit more texture to the egg mix, and then you add your oyster. It's a whole thing, but I just love it. There's kind of that geekiness that involves in finding things out. Whether you have it or not, you can always explore and read. But obviously, it's always best to try it if you can come across it.
Of course.
Yeah.
I think especially, not to dwell on the C word, COVID, but during that time, it prevented a lot of people that wanted to go out and travel. They couldn't do it, so it meant, I think, more people were trying dishes that they would usually find in Thailand and trying it for themselves.
Yeah.
And that's a positive to come from that, isn't it, I think? Not as positive as we'd have liked. They didn't get to go on holiday. But.
No, I mean, there are so many silver linings, because in a sense, I found in COVID, first of all, it was a great time for cookbook writers, because people bought lots of books, so that was great. But also, like, in terms of sending the message out, because people were tuning into videos and demos that I was doing, and other people, all over, and just this ability to spend time in the kitchen because there was nowhere else to go. We were at home, was absolutely incredible. And I think one of the things that so there's a lot of lessons that I've learned, and I think a lot of other people have learned from COVID. And one of them is that when in a time of crisis, and it seems like we're kind of going from one crisis to the next in the last few years, food and cooking is the one place that you can really kind of find refuge and comfort. It's like we can't always go out. Maybe it's become too expensive. Maybe we're just literally like COVID situation. We're not allowed to go out, etc. But there's always something happening, and those kind of basic skills that many have lost. Many people don't bother cooking or don't bother learning how to cook. Is something that we've learned to appreciate and learn again or relearn during COVID. And so this is one thing. And another thing, so I've got a book out actually at the moment called Extra Good Things. And it's like clear lessons from COVID. And one of the clear lessons that I learned through COVID is that you need a fridge full of condiments, things that have a lot of flavor. So you can just roast a potato, make a bowl of rice, and then you chuck things on it. So you don't want to start from raw ingredients every time you walk into the kitchen 3 times a day. That's just a lot of work and a lot of washing up. So we in that book, Extra Good Thing, we go, Noor, who is my co-author on the book, and I have said, like, okay, you can cook the dish, so there's like normal recipe book with delicious things, but every recipe has a takeout, so you have like a marinade or a sauce or a drizzle or a sprinkle that you can just make a bit more of, and then next time you want to cook, you just take that out of the fridge or off the shelf and you sprinkle or you marinate or you just put it on your roast potato, and it's not like reinventing the wheel. In a way, it is reinventing the wheel, because that's how people used to have. They used to have sauerkraut, or they used to have, a sauce. And each culture has its own set of long shelf life, non-refrigerated items that sit there on the counter and are ready to be added. And it's incredible. I mean, everything started like that. Cheese started like that. All preserves. But to be able to create those things at home is an incredible thing. And like post-COVID, I've got so many more jars in my fridge of pickles and chili and ferments and things like that, because I needed them, because I just couldn't be bothered to make food 3 times a day.
Well, not many people
from scratch. Yeah, and it's quite, and I think there is a limit to how much time you're going to spend in your kitchen. I mean, there's other things to do, right? I'm saying that to you, right? That doesn't make sense.
Have you all got the new book, by the way? Have you got
the new book is out for sale, I think, and it's signed, so there's Christmas presents.
Yeah, when you go here down in the atrium, the Waterstones are there selling the books, and he has signed them all. We talk about your travels, and globalization is huge, and particularly in food. Lots of foods are traveling, but what that does mean is a rise, I think maybe in the last decade or so, of fusion cuisines. I mean, it's always been a thing if you go back to Tex-Mex. But I went for, it was Mexican-Japanese recently.
Yeah, bad.
And it was essentially, it was raw salmon on a Dorito. And that's not a joke, that's what it was. And that's when I thought, right, okay, this fusion isn't a good thing in here. So where do you stand on the whole?
So first of all, I think everything is fusion. Everything we eat was fusion at one point in time. So it's never been static. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes, where people who are trying to understand food or talk about food or is to think that that food is static. It's always been in flux. It's always been about fusion. One culture affects the other. If you travel around the Mediterranean, that I know quite well, it's such a mix of Arab influences and Christian influence and pre-Arab influences. Jewish, and the whole lot. And you can see it in Spain, and you can see it in Algeria, and you can see it in Lebanon. And these things are really fascinating because we've always used to trade in ingredients, and people always used to move. And the fact that Italy has a particular cuisine has only everything to do with those interactions between routes of trade in the north and Arab influences from the south. And so you see that all those interplays and interconnections in each food culture, and it's fascinating to see. The trouble with fusion, the way you describe it, is that it's kind of done. It doesn't take into consideration lots of factors. So, for instance, I love playing with things, but I think there's also a limit to how much you can do. So I've got a test kitchen now because I've sold lots of books. So I can have recipe developers and people that work together with me, and we have a great time trying different things and mixing things up. But we never do it for the sake of doing it. We're never going to say, today we're going to do Mexico meets Japan, or Brazil meets Japan, or these kind of things. It doesn't really work like that, or it shouldn't work like that. It's more likely that when we try to, let's say, try a new version of cauliflower steak, and we've done green tahini sauce, and we've realized that that's really nice and fruity and nutty, and it goes really well with vegetables. Vegetables, as opposed to meat, they benefit much more from higher levels of saucing, of those kind of intense flavors, because they have less to start with, like umami and like deep flavors that maybe some meats have. especially if they've been aged. So you're kind of trying to inject with a lot. So if that worked, then we go, okay, what else is there in our arsenal that would kind of make that work well? And so we might say, okay, well, in Chinese cuisine, there is a way of introducing even more of that through fermented products like soy or miso or things like that. So you add a bit of that and you see if that helps. But it's a very kind of gradual step. And it's not for the sake of doing fusion. And I think that's the kind of thing that you're talking about. I get infuriated when I get these. I mean, it could be really good, but it has to have thought gone into it, and it's not just for the sake of mixing things up. That's the kind of magic.
Yeah, I think that brings me nicely to cultural appropriation, particularly within the food industry. Where do you think the line is, and how do you stay on the right side of that line?
So cultural appropriation is a big topic now, and I think people are generally very sensitive to it, and I think for a good reason, because there is a lot of injustices everywhere, and you wanna make sure that there's less injustice. So you want to tell a real story and the true story, and you don't want to just kind of gloss over things. So I think it's important to talk about the origin of a dish, or where it came from, or who benefits from cooking it or selling it, etc. But it's really important not to mix that up with the act of cooking. So I don't think there's any problem with someone from one culture cooking the food of another culture, because I think this has always happened. This is how ideas come up. It's not realistic, and it's not desirable to want to kind of segregate and create communities that are allowed to cook or not to cook. So this has to carry on. If a white person can't cook Mexican food, or if a Mexican food can't cook white food, that's kind of the end of the world, really, because then it just becomes segregated. We're back into ghettos. You don't want that. And I think, and as I said in different words, the whole richness of what we've got, when you go to restaurants, you've got this incredible richness of a cuisine, of a culture or a region. It's because there's been this exchange. But, and that's a big but, you're going into questions of who benefits and who makes the money, or who takes the credit for a thing. And then it becomes complicated. So I come from Israel, and we've got a big famous conflict, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in this conflict, there is a lot of issues to do with food, because food is at the heart of agriculture. Food, cooking is at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian culture, because we cook very similar food, Palestinian and Jews now, where we are in history. The food has become quite similar, and that is because Jews have adopted a lot of the cuisines, a lot of the dishes and the methods of cooking and the ingredients of Palestinians. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, per se, but there's a lot of other injustices. There's occupation in the West Bank, and there's things that are going wrong, and there is a lot of injustice in the way food is being perceived in the world, and as Israeli, while it's actually in many times Palestinian, so that there is an injustice there. So I think the most important thing is the thing that I try to do is tell the story, and that as cooks and as people who cook and talk about food, that's the best you can do, is just tell the story. So if I make falafel or hummus, I can say, well, these are core dishes of Palestinian food, but I also like to tell you that it's also dishes of Jewish people who immigrated from Iraq or Egypt or Lebanon to Israel, and that was their food for millennia, I think. So it depends which dish, but it does go back thousands of years. So these are all great stories to tell, but you have to tell them as they are. You can't just kind of say, oh, well, that's Israeli food, or modern Israeli food, without saying where it came from and where those dishes are created.
And hummus is a great example, I think, because one of the sharpest criticisms that I see on both sides of the cultural appropriation argument is ownership as you said, like
his ownership, yeah.
and hummus. I hear so many different stories as to where hummus originates from.
Yeah. So this is it. So I just an anecdote. I'll go back to hummus. I was just on a holiday in Greece now, and I was sitting in a restaurant, and we had a delicious meal. And then at the end, I said, I don't know what happened to me. Maybe it's age or something. I asked the waiter, could I have a Turkish coffee? And I go, oh my God, what I just said Turkish coffee and I'm in Greece. It's the same coffee, but you don't say Turkish coffee. You say Greek coffee in Greece, and you say Arabic coffee in the Arab world. But they're very similar. They're cooked in a similar way. They're full of flavor and sediment, and they're like this kind of Middle Eastern things. But it becomes so important if the two nations are in conflict. And that's what happened to hummus. I mean, I think it's very difficult to say where hummus started. I mean, some people trace it back to Egypt, which is, pre-Judaism and pre-Islam. It's like it goes back a very long time ago. Some people trace it back. A lot of what we know about the food of the Middle East come from Iraq in the 13th and 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, which was a cultural hub of the Middle East, Baghdad. It's the first cookbooks that we have in the world come from Baghdad, and then you find hummus, and you find a bunch of dishes that are the beginning of what we recognize as Arabic, Middle Eastern cuisines, but the fact that they are there, it doesn't mean they invented them, right? Like they may have existed before, but we just don't know because nobody else has documented. Mm-hmm. So it's very difficult to tell these stories, and it's very precarious to tell these stories because you don't know who's going to come and bite you for what you've just said.
Exactly. Yes.
And I've had a lot of trouble over the years, but from really silly situations like. I've got this story that I like telling, which is like, so I like to reinvent things and inject things with flavor and play with food, as I've said already. And my husband, he's from Northern Ireland, so my late mother-in-law used to make an Irish stew. And one time I said, show me how you make an Irish stew. And she showed me how she makes her Irish stew. And then in The Guardian, I published a recipe for my Irish stew, and I even put it in inverted commas, and I added like parsley and a strip of orange, and I just injected it. And I got all these angry comments, like people are like English people, even not Irish people, like, what are you doing? This is not an Irish stew. Irish stew is just like mutton and potatoes, and I was like, who wants to eat that, right? So I go like,
I hope you didn't say that.
Yeah, no, but. And like people get really all wound up, and Irish people don't even care. They didn't mind that I added things and call it an Irish stew. So that's an example of like cultural appropriation, where it was kind of like it doesn't matter to anyone if I play with the Irish stew, right? So these are just two examples of how these things work, and I think we should really kind of just keep our eyes out to the power structure. Like the Irish don't really lose anything if I play with the Irish stew, or the Italians if I put like silly things on pizza. I mean, there's pizza everywhere. They've won this war, so like it's the ultimate international food. So it doesn't matter if there's pineapple on the pizza.
I like pineapple on the pizza.
Yeah, it's good.
Somebody groaned. Did somebody groan?
So I think these are all things that should be judged on their own merits, and if there is really something at stake, then it's really important. But if there isn't, then I think we're wasting our time really fighting really silly wars. And like people in Spain were really angry when Jamie Oliver added like smoked paprika and like, chorizo to the paella.
Wow.
And I really say to myself, like, why not? And who cares? I mean, seriously. I mean, maybe I will regret saying that, but it's sometimes it's important and sometimes it's not.
Yeah. Do you think that? I say we, I'm talking about the people of the UK, but I mean this could be worldwide. Do you think we need to increase our palates and food experiences more? Or do you think we're at a level now where actually we can get whatever we want?
I think we can get, the answer is yes, we can get whatever we want. And I think we don't need to expand our palates anymore. One of the things that I think often is that, and I've got much to blame for that as well. Is that there is kind of we're quite inundated with ideas about food that come from all channels. You know, like there's foods from all over the world coming, and sometimes it feels like it would be good to just sit for a moment and learn how to cook a food of a particular style or type or region, whatever you want to call it. And because I'll often have these questions, and you can ask at the end if you want. I want to start cooking Burmese food. So what are the ingredients? And I want to ask the question. So what other cuisines have you learned now that you want to be? There's this kind of constant race for the exotic and the difference, and I think it's much more relaxing to cook things on repeat and kind of do things that you want and not always. It's fine to try new cuisines. And I think it's a great thing to do, but it's also really good to kind of have dishes that you really love and cook over and over again, because that makes you more confident and allows you to play. You know, so for instance, like with let's say the Middle Eastern, which is also a very general definition palette, there are certain ingredients that are key, and like tahini and preserved lemons and za'atar, and they're things that I cook with a lot. And these are, I can make a pantry list of, 15 items that you could have in your pantry, and you can cook so many dishes with these 15 ingredients. And then you can invent your own dishes and do your own mixes once you've learned how to cook those recipes. And I think that you can stay in that particular place for quite a long time and still find yourself cooking really interesting things and different things. So I think there's no rush, because I think we're just all a bit neurotic, like wanting to kind of, not everyone in this room, but just in general, always wanting to surprise and invent it's nice to relax sometimes.
I think I read an article recently, and it's certainly true with me, that most households only have 5 or 6 dishes in their repertoire that they will make regularly, that they know off the top of their head. They go, well, let's have that tonight. I'd love to be able to improve on that.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be 5 or 6, but I think if it's 15, it's a good number, or 20, and that's not. That's achievable. You can learn how to make. It depends on how do you find a dish, but it's quite a lot. And I don't think, going back to kids, my kids love the familiar, and I think, when they get their familiar food, that's what I want to eat. We all like kids' comfort food really deep down. If it's like those delicious, lasagnas and things that they get, and they always come and say, actually, that's what I want for dinner. I don't want like aubergine with yogurt for my dinner.
Not again, Dad. Put the preserved lemon down, Daddy. What do they like? What's their favourite dish of yours that you cook for them? Do you get to cook much for them?
I cook. I don't cook so much at home because Carl, my partner, he cooks. They're more normally their meals. I'm in charge of breakfast. Yeah. So I always do breakfast, and I love breakfast. I wake up with a lot of energy, and I also wake up with hunger. So I always. Some people are not hungry in the morning, and some people are hungry in the morning. It's like 2 types, and so I make a lot of kind of different omelets and things that I do in the morning. In the evening, I'm normally not in charge, but I cook on weekends. I cook what they want to eat, and they want to eat like any other kid. They like to eat pasta and rice. They like kind of simple flavors. Mm-hmm. They're not very fussy. They used to be really fussy, but now they're 7 and 9, so they're less fussy. So I can give them more things. But the things that they would want the most is what every kid would like, is those kind of childhood staples. So I don't try not to give it to them. So they would get that, or they like a curry, and they love rice. So I like making rice, and I like making different rices with different flavors. So you can make your rice just by infusing the water with something different every time. So they're still okay with that, and I think a lot of kids are okay with that, with just a little bit of something, so you can infuse your water with cinnamon and star anise and a bit of lemon skin, and that is a really nice combination. Or the next level up would be like curry leaves and mustard seeds, and then they're okay, but you just do it in stages, and they learn to.
Do they get stuck in? Do they help?
Sorry?
Do they help? Do they help
in
to
the
cook?
kitchen? Sort of. Max, who's 9 now, we've just reached the point that it's actually helpful that he's there. Normally, they come with all the good intentions, but they live such a mess. Then it's like it's better without.
I know that. I've got 2 children. My eldest started high school 2 weeks ago, and he had his first. They have cooking lessons now in class
in school,
which I think,
great.
It really is good.
It's
and
really
his
good.
first dish that he came home that he cooked and kept talking about how he cooked it was a fruit salad.
I love that.
I think that in the English schools that happens a lot. Fruit salad. It's just a chop. You just chop it, really. Aren't you?
But it's a cooking skill, isn't it? To learn how to peel and
handle a knife and be in the kitchen.
Yeah, you need to start somewhere.
Exactly. It's the old cliche, isn't it? You are what you eat. But I think that food really does shape our identities, and from a very early age as well.
Totally. I think, and this is why it's important to. So we're going to, if we're going back to the early years, and again, it's not always easy because we are in this funny stage, especially in this country, which it's very hard to say what's our cuisine, right? Like in the UK, because other countries have a much stronger sense of DNA about the cuisine, but this country is slightly a magpie of cuisines because it's got different influences, and so I think it's really important to create this at home. And going back to your idea that there's like a repertoire, maybe not 5, but maybe 20 dishes that we cook at home. I think it comes, there is this bit of that, like on Sundays with a roast or at Christmas, then there is such a thing as kind of a British tradition of cooking. But weekdays, you see that less and less. It could be Ottolenghi, right? Or it's like there's all these options. But I think it is important at home to create a set of dishes that are familiar, because that becomes part of the culture, the family culture, and that, like you say, that makes you who you are. And so I grew up in this kind of very cross-cultural environment because my parents were of immigrants of different cultures to Israel, both Jewish families, but one was from Germany and one was from Italy, and then it was the Middle East, so there was a lot of Palestinian food. So those kind of different food cultures featured heavily in our house. But there was such a thing as home cooking, which is my dad's Italian food. I mean, Italian food always wins. We established that already. Yeah. So when he cooked the pasta or a polenta or gnocchi or all those things, so that I grew up with those dishes, and it's definitely what I had. So what I'm saying is it's important to try to create a food culture in the house, whether there are kids or not.
And do you remember that yourself when you were growing up? Was it a big thing in your life? Did you know that you were interested in food other than just eating it?
Just eating.
That was it?
Yeah, I loved eating. Yeah, but I was really good at it. So I was, I was really interested. Like, I never thought I was going to become a chef, but I really was totally into food. So we had to go to restaurants, and I had this obsession that I've recognized now in one of my children, that it's just about like eating things and eating good things. But I wasn't really that drawn into the kitchen from a young age. I did a bit, but I wasn't. That came later when I went to university, and I realized that my food wasn't coming. So I had to fend for myself, and I think that's what a lot of people discover when they go to university, that it's not happening anymore, and then you need to learn how to cook. But that's how I really enjoyed cooking when I had to, and I think all those things that I ate and enjoyed so much eating when I was growing up became things that I wanted to cook.
Yeah. So all of this was born out of necessity, because you had to, because no one was cooking for you.
Because nobody was cooking for you, but I mean, you need to like to cook. I think it's also like, I think there is this thing now also, which is the other side flip side of the coin, that people feel quite a lot of pressure to cook and be competent cook and all the rest. I mean, there's a lot of good food around if you want to, good like small places to buy food, and you don't need necessarily to cook, but I think it could become very enjoyable if you learn how to do it and engage in it and are not terrified of it. That's the fear of cooking is the one thing that I think is the most important thing to rid yourself of.
But how do you do that?
But I think just by repetition. Nigella has a book called Cook, Eat, Repeat, and it's just an amazing title because she writes so well, and she writes in the book, she says repetition is so important in the kitchen, and it goes back to what I said earlier, to have an ability to walk into the kitchen and cook confidently, something that you've done many times before and you know how it's done. That's half the battle. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really something that I exercise at home myself, and I can cook many things, but there's certain things that I just go in and do without thinking, and then it's like meditative, Then you can just like go with the flow and cook. So I think it's important to have those things that you can do without thinking.
Can you remember your first successful dinner party? Not just cooking for yourself when you were a student, but when you had friends over.
Yeah, so when I was a student and I lived in an apartment near the market, luckily in Tel Aviv, which is an incredible Karma market in Tel Aviv. Is one of these Mediterranean markets that just has beautiful produce, lots of herbs and piles, and fresh vegetables, and there's a cheese counter with lots of young cheeses. It's very common in the Middle East and that region. And I remember going on Fridays and shopping, and I do remember those kind of spreads that people would probably recognize, like the Ottolenghi spreads, which I created by roasting vegetables and making salads and maybe grilling meat. And I remember people coming over, and this is something really special. I think when you cook a meal, and you don't have to be professional by any stretch of the imagination, that moment of success where you just see people really enjoying what you've just prepared is priceless. And people say, well, what do you like about cooking? And I always say I like three things. I like shopping for ingredients, I like cooking, and I like watching people eat the food. Nice. I like the whole three stages of the thing. So some people might only like one part of the process, and then they've got Ocado. So that or other comparable brands, and they don't need to do the shopping. But there's just so much potential for joy that you can get out of making a meal.
There used to be a time when recipes would be passed down through family. I mean, they still are, but the only way you get a recipe is if someone moved to another country and took that recipe with them. But now the internet, and in particular social media, do you think, focusing on social media, that's changed our connection to food and what we eat and how we eat?
It's a really good question, because I think I don't know that I have the answer to this question, really, because social media is kind of relatively young, and especially this explosion of food on social media is kind of relatively young. So I don't know what it does to households, I think a lot of young people that live on their own or share, etc., they probably are very much affected by that, and they probably cook what appears on their screens a lot. I know that for a fact. But I don't know what happens to established households where there's a lot of things to juggle, and there's like a meal is one of many things that happen, etc. And so I think it's just too early to say whether this will create a kind of a whole new generation of families that cook in a particular way. I think the thing is with social media, it's quite, especially with the latest, like TikTok, it's not really about cooking. It's about videos that show you things with food. It's not really often it's just like, how beautiful someone spreads chocolates, like a Nutella on their toast, and that gets like so many likes because it's like, soft chocolate on toast. I mean, it's not always about. It's mostly not about cooking. It's mostly about like kind of visual effects. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how deep that will actually reach or go, but it might.
I think it's certainly bringing, again, my eldest child is 12. He's got this deep fascination with food that's not just come from me and his mum, but from what he sees on TikTok or Instagram.
Yeah.
He'll come home and say, can we deep fry a whole chicken and eat it in a burger?
Yeah.
No, we can't. But you can give it a like.
Not tonight, darling.
But it's really changing, I think, young people's attitudes as well, in particular.
Yeah, no, I think they are. And again, there is, like in so many things, in fields that are not even connected to food, there is this huge gap between real life and what happens on the screen. And I do think that cooking on the screen is a kind of aspirational thing that people can watch and enjoy. And then there's the real stuff that happens, which is like getting food on the table on time, making it delicious. But there's certain things that I think like people will probably, there's this, all of a sudden there is a particular way of doing something that is just nice and fun and useful. And there's all these tray bakes that are on TikTok where you take a bunch of, there was this one that probably everybody knows with the feta and tomatoes, right? That was like a couple of years ago. Yeah. And there's always this something where people just show you how to do something that's really nifty and cool and like useful. And there's no harm with that's for sure.
Do you find that food trends as perpetuated by social media affect you and what you're doing and your recipe development?
I have no doubt. I think sometimes I don't even know that it's from there because it's in the ether. That's just what you get, and that when you go to restaurants or what you see, subconsciously, there's like we are exposed to things that happen all the time. So I'm sure it affects how we cook. I think in a way you could ask the same question about beautiful pictures in cookbooks. Like before there were beautiful pictures in cookbooks, there were instructions, and there wasn't this whole idea that you make things look lovely and colorful with garnishes, etc. And much more of our history was made out of brown food than with all these kind of beautifully finished off, bit of tomatoes on the vine, slightly grilled, and this is just for visuals. It's not essential for flavor. Another story that happened to me when I was filming for Channel 4 years ago. I went with the British camera crew to film in Jerusalem. And there was this woman who is an expert in traditional Jewish Eastern European food, and she's the most incredible cook. She's much revered and loved for her cooking. She had a column in the paper for years, and she was showing us how to make a dish that is a real staple of Jewish cookery. It's called cholent or hamin. It's a Friday night dish that is a lot of things in a pot that are put in the oven because Jews cannot light fire. Traditional Jews, not me, they cannot light fire on Sabbath. So they put things in a hot oven and leave them there overnight. And it used to be the baker's oven that had the residual heat from baking bread. They'd bring the pot and they put it there. And it's the most delicious thing because normally you'd have like a piece of beef with bones, like a brisket or something, and you'll have like a bag with barley that kind of the thing seeps through a porous bag, and you'd have like potatoes and maybe an egg, and it's really delicious things that are cooked together for like sometimes 12, 18 hours, and it comes out and you smell, and it's just brown, it just looks awful. So we went to her on a Friday to see how she prepares it, and then we came back on a Saturday when she took it out. And we were just looking forward to seeing how that thing. And as soon as it came out, James, the director, just went like that to me. He said, "That is not for British television. It's just not gonna fly." And there was so much effort that went into this dish, and it just cannot be shown on screen. And it's amazing how much that is a new thing, that things need to look good.
Yeah.
Things need to look good. But things can taste so good when they really don't look good, and we forget that.
Yeah, but then we couldn't Instagram it.
Yeah, we can't
We
Instagram
get no
it.
likes
That's
from
why
it.
people don't get black dogs, just brown dogs, because you can't Instagram them if you didn't know that, because you can't see the black dogs very well.
It's true. We got a brown dog during lockdown.
So black dogs are cheap and brown dogs are really expensive.
They're very expensive.
Puppies, I mean.
When we're talking about these trends on social media, and in particular food now has to look good, and you can see it, you go into a restaurant and you think, okay, that's been put on that plate because they know we're going to take a photo.
Yeah.
I mean, some restaurants now, you go in and the lighting is in such a way so it is going to help you to take a picture on Instagram. Do you think that those trends are, in effect, leading the restaurant industry now, rather than it being the opposite way around?
Yeah, and again, it's a mixed situation, so it's not only bad or only good.
Yeah.
The answer is definitely yes, this is happening. So the way things look do guide chefs in restaurants in creating menus that have this kind of visual appeal. And often, but I mean, also, like, people are not fools. It needs to taste good as well. So it's not just one or the other. It's or one at the expense of the other. So there are all the effort that goes to make things look good. Often, I mean, if it's a good restaurant, it goes into making them taste good. And I also think this exchange has got a lot of positive things going for it. So people do communicate cross-culturally through social media about food. You know, it's amazing how things travel very, very quickly and in really positive ways. Yeah. So, you know, we do really know so much more. I mean, the whole craze about Korean cooking, and, you know, and kimchi and gochujang and all these things that are we all talk about. It's been around in the UK like 2-3 years, but we all have learned about it, and these are really powerful ingredients, and they're great in all sorts of contexts. You don't need to cook, you know, kimchi. Those are really strong pickles that make incredible fritters. You know, if you mix them with a bit of rice and cheese and make balls and deep fry them, they're absolutely delicious. And that is just something that maybe people wouldn't have done. And that is all social media, because everything travels really, really quickly.
Yeah. In terms of what you do in the development kitchen, we've already established that some of it is kind of inspired by what you see, what's going on around you. But how does your development kitchen work? What's an average day like for you when you go in?
Yeah, that really changed with the years. So I never set out to have a development kitchen as such. I mean, so when I started publishing cookbooks, which is like 12 or 14 years ago, I used to test the recipes at home and write them at home. And so Plenty was the first book I did on my own, which came out of my Guardian column. And every recipe I tested at home. And it was fine, but in some ways I didn't really enjoy this process when I was kind of just doing it on my own. I'm a social creature, and I love like the being with people and banter and conversation, and also actually discussing food. You know, so when you cooked something and taste it, you get you ask yourself quite a lot of existential questions. You know, like, is this really good? You know, did I cook something delicious? And if there's nobody else there to taste, then you're not always entirely sure. And as soon as I added more people to the equation, which means when I started, I took a space under a railway arch in Camden in London, a really small space, which became my test kitchen, but essentially it was just myself and one more person. It just became so much more fun, you know, because it was a conversation rather than just things going on in my head. And so that was the first stage. And then gradually, with success, you know, there were more books and there were more newspaper columns to write, etc. People were added to the test kitchen, to the extent to which I do much less cooking and testing, or hardly any now, but I just kind of oversee this. And it became way more interesting the more people you added to the mix, because everybody has an opinion. So we have the system where each recipe tester, now there's roughly 4 or 5 of us, takes a dish and carries them through from start to finish. And it's their dish. So it's not my dish, it's Noor's dish, or it's Chaya's dish, or it's Jake's dish. These are people that work in the test kitchen. And they own it. But it doesn't mean other people can't comment. So they make it and we taste, and I would say something, or Noor would say something, and in a way that makes it's a much more foolproof system for good food, because it has to pass through quite a lot of palates before it goes like, okay, well, that's good. And so we taste things like maybe most times, like at least 4 or 5 or even more times before we sign it off. But it's a great process, because it allows for people to contribute ideas. So, well, maybe we should add this or take a bit of that, or what did you think of doing it? And some things people don't even think about that are really crucial to cooking, that are very technical. Like if you cook something, it's kind of trivial, but unless you do it, you don't know. It's like the dimensions of the pan can be so crucial to what the result. So in my recipe, people say, like, why do you get into these details? Do I really need to know that the tray is 20 by 24? I mean, can it not be like 18 by 16? And yeah, many times yes, but also often not, because the evaporation and coloring, and so you want something to sear or not to stew, or you want things to reduce in a particular way to create a sauce. These are all really important things, and every time you change a tray and the size really changes the result, you go like, wow, that really made a difference. It was only just about the dimensions of a baking tray. It sounds silly. So this is our job, and these are the conversations that we have. And like there is a recipe in Shelf Love, which is the previous book that came out of the test kitchen, for a cake, and Noor, who's the head of the test kitchen, she wanted to make it's a coconut cake. She wanted to make layers, so she said, "Oh, let's do 2. It's like a stacked cake, like with two stacks." And but the problem is that you need to have 2 22 centimeters baking rings in order to do it. And I said to her, who's got two identical? Well, not that many people have 2 identical cake rings. And she said, oh, it's okay. They'll bake one. It'll cool down. They'll make the other one. I said, like, that is a lot to ask for someone at home. So let's just do a tray, because if they do a tray bake, they do the same amount of cake. They put the icing on top. But we couldn't agree. So essentially, the recipe has the 2 versions. And then you can pick. You can do a tray bake, my way, which is easier and practical. You can do the stacked option for a party, or if you want to spend like a few hours in the kitchen, and you can
then do it the other way. Where are you happiest at the minute? Is it in the kitchen cooking, developing, or is it writing?
So I really have to. I don't do so much cooking anymore in the test kitchen. I do cooking at home. I'm involved in every conversation around food that happens in the test kitchen, and I also have to go to the restaurant and try the food there. So I spend a lot of time now just overseeing it. And happiness is a really difficult question. I mean, I suppose I'm very happy to be able to dip in and out and kind of do different things, and to be honest, the thing that makes me the happiest at the moment is when these books are published, to kind of notice people cooking them. Again, the phone is very useful because you can actually see people cooking, and to engage in that process, like what's popular and what makes sense for what else do we want to do. And so I love all the parts of the creative process. I really love shooting the recipes for a book. Like I love the photography, and I'm highly involved in that process, in the photography. I have a very strong visual idea of what I want.
Are the photographers all right with that? Because I've worked with some photographers and they don't take direction very well.
No. Actually, I have the books that are not the test kitchen books, but my bigger books. I work with one incredible guy called Jonathan Lovekin, and he's a really, really good, very patient person, and we work together without a food stylist or anyone. It's just him and me, and we have a really good understanding. He never gets we try things over and over again, and we work quite similarly. So we shoot things in stages, like, and we choose the best version. So even something is not completely finished, sometimes it looks the best, so that would become the image.
The loose topic of this conversation has been the universal language of food. The world now is both increasingly divided, but also super connected. What role, this is quite a broad question, I guess, but what role do you think food is playing in the modern world today?
Again, I think it's a really hard. I don't know exactly how to answer this question because, first of all, because I think the world is such a flux that it's very hard to say about anything about anything about anything. Yeah. You know, I just find it very difficult. It's just such a moving target. So I don't really know. I find that food, going back to TikTok and Instagram, has really become so much part of popular culture to the extent that it's very hard to see where this is all going. I find it. I don't know how to answer this question. I think again, like going back to things that happen on screens and things that happen in real life. I think, and it's similar to the question that I've given you earlier. I think food and cooking become those kind of safe places where people feel like, okay, this is something that I know, this is something I can do, and this is something that I find grounding because it connects me to real things, ingredients, real processes, cooking, but it also connects me to the people that I share food with or eat with. And so I think and I hope that in this kind of really mad world that we're in, where nothing is taken for granted, food will become that thing, that place where people feel a sense of comfort and ease. And that would be, I think, that the ideal scenario, or at least food will be, that will be the one place where we can all get a bit of joy, because it just feels so unsettled everywhere else. And
that leads us into the state of restaurants at the moment. I mean, restaurants in the last 5 years have been through the mill.
Totally.
With lockdown, COVID, Brexit's played a part.
Yeah.
There's a staffing crisis, it seems, across restaurants. Many restaurants go into the signs that say, please bear with us, we do not have the staff. Where do you see the future of restaurants?
Well, the one thing that I was really, and I think everybody watched that happening with lots of admiration, is how well restaurants have really readjusted and reapplied themselves during the pandemic. So I'm by no means was leading on that kind of what do they call them, pivoting or whatever it is that we were doing. But everyone found ways to spend their time trying to do creative things. Whether it supplemented the income, mostly not. But for some, yes. But it was an incredible show of flexibility and innovation, where like restaurants became like these kind of takeout kitchens, delivery kitchens. Our waiting staff went to people's home and delivered the food before it was before the other people started doing it, and there was all these platforms for deliveries, and it was incredible to see how what we take as a business model that is stagnant and familiar and seems like is God-given, can easily be transformed and shifted so quickly into something that I was very proud to see that we did. And so many restaurants survived through these measures, but also many went down. And I think that this is the situation now, again, with crisis upon crisis. You mentioned COVID, cost of living, staffing. Yeah. And the fact that we can't pay bills and we can't recruit, it's insane. I mean, I don't know how. I find myself in a very fortunate position where we have several restaurants, so we can move people around. There's a bit of flexibility there. There's income coming from books that helps too, and that was always. But a standalone restaurant, it's almost like a miracle. And you should all go out to your local restaurants. That's all. That's the only. Don't buy my book. Go to your little local restaurants or shops and support them, because it's really, really tough. Really, really tough. Yeah. And it is a miracle that this is happening. And I think something will happen. I think we have all learned a lot of lessons from this. And again, this kind of things that have happened, and I can tell you about my business. Is that we do things really differently now. And again, like, I never anticipated that we could be closed we really cut down on shifts and opening hours, etc., because there's not enough staff around. And somehow almost everybody benefits from that, like, not being open on a Sunday and things that I just think, we could never pay the bills without this change, etc., or not doing breakfast. But it's fine. I think it's incredible how flexible and there's this strength that we can find.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope it all works out for the best. Before we throw over to the audience for questions, what's next for you? What's coming up? The new cookbook's out at the moment, which you've just told everyone not to buy. So there's always things in the pipeline. We're always testing recipes for books that are going to come in the future, and we've been doing more online YouTube videos and things of that nature. And we've just recently, a year ago, we moved the test kitchen to a bigger space in the Holloway in North London, and we're trying to do more things there. But essentially, the big project now is kind of integrating more of the restaurants, what goes on to the restaurant, into the test kitchen, because we've had this creativity going on in the restaurant, in the test kitchen, and there was not too much of a cross pollination, and now we're doing that. So the chefs are coming to the test kitchen, trying their dishes, and test kitchen sends out. So we're working on that. And I just hope the whole thing is just to create this incredible creative hub that creates books and recipes and ideas and products, and that's what we're doing. Do you enjoy the social media stuff?
Moderately.
That's a no, isn't it? That's a no. All right, I won't push you any more on that. Right, I think we're going to go out to you guys now. I don't know if the lights are going to go up, but if you put your hands up if anyone's got a question for Yotam, and there will be someone wandering around.
Here's someone standing up.
With a microphone somewhere. Okay, I can see the microphone. So there's a lady just there in the right. Yeah, you got her?
Hi. I was just wondering, are you eating anywhere fancy tonight, or have you had anything interesting tonight for dinner in Leeds?
I don't. I'm afraid to say you'll have to ask other people, because I don't think I am. I'm going back to my hotel, and I no.
Where should he go? Where should he go in Leeds?
Where should he go?
Yeah.
I would recommend Sarto's. It's a pasta restaurant.
What's it called?
Sarto's.
Sarto's. Okay.
Yeah.
For my next visit.
Yeah.
I have to go to bed early. I've got an early start tomorrow morning, and I don't react very well when I eat very late. So I'll leave that for next time. Thank you.
Okay. Next question. Hands up. Someone here, the furthest possible person from where you are.
Hi, I've got many questions, but I'll stick to one.
Yeah.
I have quite a large family, and we absolutely love an Ottolenghi feast. It's become part of our life, all of us all gathering for a feast. So I just wondered, if you were planning a feast, what would you have on your menu?
Oh, that's a nice question. So I think for me, it has to have a little bit of everything, because that's a feast, right? So I often, but it also has to be something that you could put together so you don't want to become a slave to the feast, right? So you can go in various directions. I love doing a dish that involves so if for meat eaters, and then I'll go for the vegetarian option, I love making flavored rice with the liquids from poaching meat. So whether it's lamb or chicken, and there is a lot of dishes like that around the Middle East. And there's one dish in Shelf Love, which is called celebration rice. It sounds more complicated than it is, so I'll just go over it very quickly. You boil a chicken, which is super easy, and then you take there's some spices there, and then you once it's cooled down, you shred it, and then you take your chicken stock to make your rice, and then there's other condiments to go with. And then you kind of spread it out on a tray with lots of flatbreads underneath, really thin flatbread. So the layer of flatbread, that rice cooked in the chicken stock, shredded chicken, and then things like fried nuts and maybe pomegranate seeds, and then a drizzle of yogurt that's been let down with the chicken stock, so it kind of goes there and kind of soaks the rice. And you'd find versions on this dish in Persian cooking and Arabic cooking, and it goes back to so it makes use of everything. You eat the chicken, but you're also going to have the stock, and you're also going to have rice. So these are wonderful feasts that I love doing, and it sounds like a lot of work, but actually when you break it down, it's actually quite doable. And the other thing is, it's quite predictable, but I do love to do like different salads of different natures, so things with different textures. So one would be like, I would say like a ratatouille, so lots of like roasted vegetables that you can stick in the oven and let them do their things with tomato and spices, and then I often add like fresh chopped herbs at the very end. So that would be one, and the other one could be more textural, like a tabbouleh kind of thing with chopped up herbs, and you can do it with cauliflower or with bulgur or with other grains. So kind of a mixture, and the advantage with that is not that it's quite a lot of work in the sense that you're chopping and cutting it, but you can make everything in advance. And for me, this is like the ultimate thing for a feast or for just entertaining. The more things I can make in advance, and it's anybody will tell you, oh, just make ahead everything, but it really is what you need to do, because it's just so effective. Everything can sit there, and then you just put it in plates. I make it sound very easy. I know it's not that easy, but that's a feast.
I'm starving. Okay, any more hands? There's a couple down the front here. Can you get in there? You just put your hand up just so we can find you. We'll do both. Come to the lady at the front first, or the back.
Right. Can you hear me all right? Yeah.
Yes.
You were just starting to talk about making breakfast for your children.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you said what the breakfast was.
Oh, okay.
I think also we've got into a bit of a breakfast rut at the moment, and I don't know if you've got any.
Okay, but I guess what you need, I need to just assume that my kids and myself we're early risers, so we kind of like everybody's up at 6:30 in our house, and it's like not by choice, and it's just like I've always been an early riser, so that's just the way it is. So we do have a bit of time in the morning. So everything I say now is applicable to people like me, but I know a lot of people don't like waking up early in the morning. So we do have a bit of time. So it's not. I've got a NutriBullet, so I always make them like a smoothie. And so I throw in yogurt and ginger and whatever fruit we have, and ice and a bit of honey, and that's their drink. And it's like we had like really beautiful apricots recently, and there was apricots, and now we've got plums, and it like this is zero work, and it's like lots of nutrition if that's what you're thinking about, but it's also like delicious. And normally I make eggs, and there's nothing really so spectacular about those eggs. So it could be a scrambled eggs with. I've got no secret. It's like, you do it as you do. And I like to make cheesy omelets, and I just whip up a couple of eggs, throw them in the pan with some butter, and I throw in. I make feta and cheddar, so I mix a bit of feta and cheddar, which I always have in the fridge, and then I just roll it. In a really good non-stick pan, it's not a problem to roll. You just need to let it set almost completely, and then I roll it and I cut, so it's like a cheesy omelet. And they get bread with butter and sliced cucumber. That's a normal breakfast. And it sounds more work than it is, and you do need to wake up a bit early, but it's everything they need for the day.
We're all going for a sleepover at Yotam's. Does that answer your question? Great. And the next lady, I think, was just in front there, yeah?
Hi.
Hi.
Would you consider opening a restaurant in Leeds?
You know, this is the one question I get wherever I go. I mean, you can just fill in the gap. I think the bigger answer is, like, would I open a restaurant that it's not within a 2-mile radius from where I live, and or 3, and I've actually, I'm not sure. I mean, I've never tried. And this might happen one day, but this year we're celebrating 20 years to Ottolenghi because we started in 2002, wow. And it hasn't happened yet. So I don't know. The trouble is that there's a lot of I'm quite a control freak, and I need to know what's going on in the restaurants, even if I just walk in and see that they're still standing, and Leeds is like a bit far, so. Probably not. I mean, if I'm hand on heart, you thought I'd bring you better news, but that's after the weekend. But yeah, I don't. It's difficult. It's complicated.
But no, that was the long story. There's the gentleman at the back there. You see him. Give your arm a little wave, and they can spot you. And then there's a lady right at the back at the top, but I don't know if we can get up there. We'll try. I see you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I do quite a lot of interfaith work and work in bringing communities together. I was very interested very early on. I think it was early on in your career when you and Hamimi came together.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested in how you found him and he found you. I know you've mentioned the Middle East and the conflict at the moment. I very much understand the difficulties in people maybe coming together in that part of the world with different cultures. And then the only other question I had was before, there's an image. The only thing I found off-putting tonight was by no means anything to do with the questions, but the image that kept on appearing behind you. And I kept on wondering what it was meant to be. It looked like a tongue at the end, and that was the only connection I could make to
I do not know what those are. I wasn't watching.
I just wanted to know what someone had thought of that would represent.
So I'll answer the first question.
Yeah.
So Sammy and I are actually, we met, he's Palestinian, but we both grew up in Jerusalem. We happened to be born in the same year. But we met in London in 1999 or 1998. And we happened to be working in the same place, in the same restaurant in London. And we became very close friends, and we still are very close friends. And we were a bunch of partners that opened the business together, and Sammy was one of them, and he still is. And I think I'm often asked about this partnership. We wrote books together, and we've created our business together. And you say you do interfaith work, and I think one of the things that is so clear. Is kind of like maybe it's a negative message, or it's not the most uplifting one, but one of the things that really helped us to forge this relationship or helped it survive is the fact that we're so far removed from the actual conflict, because those friendships and relationships are put to the test so much in the Middle East, in Israel, in Palestine. Because there's things going on every single day that really challenge those friendships, so that you do find cross-religious friendships or relationships or work collaborations in Israel, in Palestine. But it's just so brittle, and things happen, all horrible things happen all the time. So I think for Sammy and for me, it was always very good to be at a distance. But actually, the fact that we are so close and we do come from such different backgrounds And actually, going back to a question that you asked earlier, Matt, food did bring us together. We cooked together, and we came together around food. I mean, there's a lot of other things that we have in common, and it's a very strong bond. But food did bring us together. So I think there's as always in life, there isn't really a clear-cut answer to these things, but it's important to keep an open mind and to try not to let events, sway you. It's very.
Of course, I suppose I thought that I wondered if there was any element of this was a statement that despite everything, food brought you together.
It's not a statement. It's not a statement, and it's just a friendship.
Okay, thank you. Have we got a mic at the top there now? Great. So, the lady with her hand up.
I've been reflecting recently on how nourishing and healing food can be, and I wondered if you're in a space where you're grieving or depressed, is there a food that you'd turn to that would help?
I think food has an incredible potential to help when, with all sorts of situations, with grief, with death, with anything that makes you feel vulnerable or sad, or any one of these emotions. And obviously, historically, all cultures have food for these particular situations. And I'm happy you're asking this because I'm working now on a different project, which is it is about food that is kind of nourishes and heals and comforts. And one of the things that we're trying to figure out in our conversation, so we don't only taste together, we also talk together, is what does it mean when food comforts you? What is comfort food? What does it do, and how does it work? And one of the things, the ideas that came in these conversations was that it has a lot to do with like a personal trajectory. So it happens to be that the people that are involved in the projects, we're all migrants. We all come from different parts of the world. Actually, not everyone but one. And each one has a different notion of what makes you feel good. Obviously, it has to do with what you ate when you were growing up. But there's definitely something. So when we compare experiences, etc., someone would say, Helen, who's been a long-time collaborator, and she's from Malaysia, originally in Australia. It's all about certain bits of Chinese food, variation on congee, rice, porridge, and that for her, that's comfort. It's so easy to digest, it's so simple, it's so unchallenging in so many ways, even if though it does have chili, etc. Someone else would go like, oh, how could I eat something like, how could all this dried shrimps and chilies and vinegar and couldn't be comforting? So it's just so relative. But I think in those moments, you kind of almost know the answer, like, what do I need? So it's about asking yourself those questions, because it is so personal, but it's also so cultural specific.
Thank you. Lady at the back there with her hand up. Is it a blue jumper?
I just wondered if you anticipate your restaurants and your menu development changing and your books changing to the cost of living crisis in this country.
Can I
anticipate that?
Sorry, can I just check? Can you all hear the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay.
So about adapting recipes or changing recipes to cost of living. I suppose this is something that we kind of almost do instinctively all the time, because this is something that is being talked about. In some ways, it's weird because it sounds like this is promotion, but this last book is exactly about these things. It's about making things with lots of impact on flavor with little effort or less effort. So, if you cook once for the next meal and you create a lot of flavor in a jar with some chilies and oil and garlic, etc., you can actually cook something really cheap and simple next time, a bowl of barley or a barley and egg and that particular condiment, and there's your meal. So we are reacting. I mean, with the restaurants, it's really complicated because we have menus and people come, and then we have all these. So it's all, there's like, as you can imagine, there's spreadsheets, and you have to answer the question like, what do people want, how much they're willing to pay, and whether we can afford. And we are constantly changing the menus in order to be able to not to kind of increase prices, because our expenses have just shot through the roof, even just like everyone else, it's like you get these, gas and electricity bills that are like 5 times what we paid last year, and it makes a huge difference. So these are things that happen all the time. But in the context of creating recipes for people to cook at home, I think I think the best meals can be done with really cheap ingredients. It's incredible. Like the previous book, Shelf Love, talks about it when it's called Shelf Love because it uses ingredients that you find on your shelf or in your cupboard, which are really cheap ingredients. A can of beans or a bag of chickpeas or a bag of polenta. These are things that are really cheap to buy. And what we tried to prove, because it was the pandemic and you couldn't go buy a fillet of cod, is that you can find those things in your cupboard and you could create a really incredible meal with those ingredients. So, totally.
Thank you. We'll come back up to there in a moment. Is there anyone else? Lady, I hope it's a lady. With her hand up just there, sorry. That's it, yeah.
Do you ever eat any cheeky snacks?
Cheeky snacks, I like this question. Oh yeah. I do eat a lot of cheeky snacks. So I've talked about it in the past. So I guess I've got in my glove compartment in my car, I've got a whole array of cheeky snacks, and I've got Skittles and Mentos and like a lot of those things. And people just can't believe that my car is so full of junk, it's an instinct. I get in the car and I have to have something sweet, and I don't recommend anyone to follow this advice, but it's just the way it is. And my kids get really annoyed because they're not always allowed into my special.
Yeah, that's Daddy's comment.
Yeah, those are my sweets. I mean, of course, I do share sometimes, but they're for me, and not for them. So that's the way it is. But I like snacks and things like that, and I'm not a purist of any kind. So I'm obsessed with chocolates. I've got lots of chocolates, and they're really good ones, and there's some pretty mediocre ones, and I'm very happy to have any of those. Yeah.
Great question. There was someone else just behind there with a hand up. Lady there with a black sleeveless top or dress. Yep.
Hi. I was just going to ask if you, when a friend or family or your husband is cooking for you, if you are able to switch off your chef testing.
Yeah.
Or if you're constantly
no.
I would have done this.
No, I'm not that kind of person. No, I really am, and that is there is something, I don't know what it is, but I'm maybe it's greed, but I love anything really. I mean, I can tell if something is better version of that particular thing, but actually my tolerance is really low. I can eat most things. It's funny. I mean, I know maybe I shouldn't be advertising it, but it is. I'm very happy with what people cook for me, and I'm mostly just grateful. So I am very happy with. And people always ask, do people ever invite you because it's intimidating to cook for a chef? And actually, yes, because I'm actually very, very happy with what people cook. I think the act of cooking is just such a generous act that it's like you're going to be really horrible if you're not going to like it. But actually, I do like it most of the time, so it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
There's a couple of people here.
Yeah, 2 down the front here. Yellow top. Sorry, I had my back to you guys, didn't I?
Yeah, so I was a vegetarian for a long time, and we were kind of always lent on like fake meat substitutes. As someone who used to eat meat, and then obviously I just kept doing the same thing I did before, but just substituting with fake meat. And it wasn't until I found like your cookbook, especially vegetarian ones, that like I kind of realised just how delicious vegetables could be by themselves. And you eat both meat and vegetables. So what is it about vegetarian cooking that like appeals to you?
Thank you. I love this question. I think I really don't like meat substitutes, and I haven't had a good one yet. And they might come, but I think there is such, and exactly like what you said in your question, there's just so much to do with vegetables before you have to go and try to use meat substitutes, because, and then I guess that's just something I've been doing for so long, is just kind of create delicious things that are just about vegetables. And I think it's really tricky, because in some ways, when vegetables try to compete with meat, they tend to lose, because you do a one-on-one comparison, and you don't try meat to be a cauliflower, so why should cauliflower try to be a piece of beef? I mean, it doesn't go both ways. So it's not supposed to work that way. But once you stop looking for that, then it's kind of a little bit liberating, I think, and I think, and you can create incredible things with only vegetables. And when I say this, I don't mean like you can't make like something that looks a bit and tastes a bit like a bolognese, with using lentils and mushrooms and barley, etc. Because we do, draw our inspiration from things that are meat, and that's absolutely fine, because that's something substantial and that's something delicious, and you could do something really good that is not a ragu, a meat ragu, using vegetables, and it will be different. But what I'm very unforgiving is using like very processed meat substitutes that are substandard meats, and they are. And we are going to look back and say, like, why did we eat all that processed food? I mean, that's my problem. So I really love the idea of creating incredible things with vegetables. Some of them might look a bit like something that is meat, or even like using steak as a metaphor. I don't mind saying, "Oh, I'm making a celeriac steak." It's okay. I mean, nobody's ever going to mistake that celeriac for a steak. They're not going to make that mistake. But it conjures up certain images of like juiciness, etc. So those are the kind of things that I like, and I think there is so much to do with vegetables, and mushrooms have so much flavor in them, and there's dried mushrooms, and you could do a lot, and so for me, I'll carry on doing that, and I'll carry on publishing recipes for meat, because there is. People will carry on eating some meat. So, and I think it's just about shifting the balance a little bit. Like, so of course, if you're completely vegetarian or vegan, that's a wonderful thing. But I also think there's a lot of room for places in between. And I'm very happy we're past that stage where we were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, when you're on either side. Yeah. And that really meant a lot of people just ate a lot of meat because they didn't want to be identified as vegan or vegetarians. We're not in this place anymore.
Yep. Great question. Yeah. Guy just in front of him.
I'm actually curious about the language of food, in terms of when you're writing or presenting or just talking to people. Anything that you think is true about the universality of the sort of language we use to entice them into your food?
I don't think I've ever thought about it so much. I mean, in some ways it's really tricky, because when we talk about things, and it's true about so many things that are of one sense and a different sense, like talking about music or talking about art or talking about food, we have already an appreciation of it without the words, right? Like, we know what it's like to taste, so we don't really need to talk about it, right? Or we don't really need to talk about music because we hear it. And so talking is kind of an extra, and sometimes I feel like the adjectives that are used to describe food are actually take away from the experience, because they're never going to live up to the experience, because it's such a rich experience. So you want to kind of, and there's a lot of cliches and a lot of things that I hear that I just don't want to hear, when because there's a limited vocabulary that you have when you can describe flavor, but there's actually limitless combinations of flavor that you can experience. So I'm always a bit in two minds, and I try to, over the years, I've realized that I use less and less adjectives, and even on social media now, I try to kind of just describe what there is there, rather than try to, in some ways, give an idea of what it tastes like. I think the visuals do that obviously much better than the descriptions, but it's tricky, and also, in some ways, as a food writer, but also as someone who creates recipes, I don't want to mask one with the other. So normally what I do instead, and it's been very useful, effective for me, I'd rather than talk about food, I talk about a story. And I think that is a much better way to go as in an introduction to recipe. First of all, it's more interesting because they're going to eat it or not, but the description is not going to benefit anyone much. But actually, a story is really useful because you can have it without the food. You can have the story on the side.
Thank you very much. I think we've probably got time for one more. Oh,
there's a very excited one up there.
Is it that person?
Yeah.
That's the most excitement I've seen in a long time.
So earlier you talked about how you prefer to travel to places that have good food. So my question would be, how do you define what good food is? Is it somewhere with more familiar flavors, something new and exciting, or something that's sort of got the hype on social media and stuff like that?
I think the middle one, it's like, it's kind of, it has to be exciting, right? Like if I was, and I guess if I travel, I don't want it to be too familiar, because you travel to discover new things. It's really hard to say what good food is, right? Like this is the one that is the question. How do you define good food? And it goes back to this question of like, what is it? You taste it and you know, right? But there is what you do know, and it's really interesting. And I did discover it while traveling and while doing TV, is that there is certain conditions in which really interesting cuisines evolve. So just to give a couple of examples. Like Turkey has an incredible cuisine, and it has a whole load of historical reasons that I'm not going to really touch on, but I've read about it, and someone says that the most interesting cuisines that have evolved around the Mediterranean were evolved around a court, because there was a lot of money and there was a lot of cooks busy with the unlimited resources developing dishes. So that applies to the Ottoman Empire, to Turkey, but it also applies to Morocco, and where there's always, for a long time, there has been a king, and also to bits of India where there was sultans, and it's really interesting when you go to these places. It's also going back to the question about how stagnant it is. It's always been about bringing ingredients from the rest of it. We know how it happened in France and Italy. Those are stories that are told a bit more. But it's always about someone coming from a different culture, bringing in new ideas, and then with all the effort that goes, whether it's Versailles or whether it's Istanbul or whether it's Casablanca or Marrakesh, these are places where creations have been made, but through those mixes. So I always try to read a little bit about how food was created in a certain place, but I now have an idea before I go whether it's going to be exciting. One place that I'm still dying to go to, and I don't think I'm going anytime soon, is Iran, which has one of the most exciting food traditions that has to do with its particular position in the world, where food traveled from Asia to North Africa, and it's got incredible cuisine that has a really deep history with rice, herbs. The mixture of sweet and sour, which you find in Moroccan cooking, actually comes back to Persia. So I would love to go there one day, because I know there's so much exciting food. I've tasted Iranian food, but I haven't tasted it there, and I'd love for it to be a time in history in which I can travel there safely and try the food.
Well, that was worth all the excitement. A great last question. Thank you very much. And a great last answer as well.
Thank you. Thank you.